So in my last video, which is a fine catch cook video regarding a slip bobber setup, a lot of people had comments about the slip bobber setup and how I rigged it. So in today's video, we're gonna run down river. I'm gonna show you what these crappie actually look like on a rock pile, which is something different than a lot of you probably fish. We're gonna show you what they look like on the Garmin side view here. And then I'm also gonna go in depth on a few different setups for slip bobber fishing, kind of how I tie it on, why I tie it on a specific way. But before we run down river, if you're looking for a performance hoodie like this, go to accrappiesticks.com. They got a deal right now. If you buy one of these hoodies, you get a tumbler for free. So check out accrappiesticks.com, pick up a performance hoodie like this one, get yourself a tumbler. Let's run down river, find some crappie. So during late summer, I can find these crappie set up on some rock piles or riprap on these larger river systems. Typically, they're gonna set up on the windward side. We don't have a ton of wind today, but yesterday when I was out here fishing, we had a decent amount of wind, and that wind pushes all that bait fish towards one side of the rock pile. I mean, you get the whole food chain set up specifically on that windward side of the rock pile or the riprap. So I'm pretty sure this rock pile is gonna come up on the left side of the Garmin screen. And typically what you're gonna look for is actually suspended fish above the rock pile. You're gonna be able to see those pretty clearly, but specifically you're looking for shadows above the rocks. So as we come up on the rock pile here, hopefully I didn't go right over it. We got some fish. Oh, it's gonna be, I did go right over it. But as you can see, there are fish suspended right over the rock pile. But then you see these shadows kind of out in the open, just off the edge of the rock pile. Those are fish suspended on that side of the rock pile. But that is probably the biggest school of crappie. It's not a huge school by any means, but that is probably the biggest school of crappie suspended right on top of that rock pile there. Typically what will happen is on these super windy days, they're gonna suspend on whichever is the main windward side of the rock, because that's where all that bait fish gets pushed to. So I think last time I was out here, they're schooled up on the downstream side of this rock pile. Let's turn back around and see if I can get this rock pile on the right side of the screen here. Okay, rock pile's coming up on the right, and in the shadows you can actually see those tiny little marks above the rocks. Those are suspended fish. Also, there's obviously some suspended fish right above the rocks there. Those look a little bit bigger, but I think it looks like the main school of fish are actually on that side of the rock pile. Again, we don't have a ton of wind today, but it looks like the main school of crappie are set up over there. I'm gonna get one more pass from a different angle, and then we'll hop up on the bow of the boat and I'll talk through the in-depth rigging of some slip bobber setups. All right, so we're gonna go across the rock pile, kind of across the current here. I was going upstream and downstream before, but now we're gonna kind of cut across from this angle as we cut across the current seam. It should be coming up on the right side of our screen here. And there is a big pile of fish right on the edge of the rock pile. It seems like they're set up on the deeper side of this rock pile. Typically, on the bigger river systems, you can find a lot of these crappie in like 12 to 20 feet of water. If there's a good amount of current moving through there, they're gonna stack up a little bit shallower. Right now, we're kind of in the bigger part of the river, so it's not a ton of current, but there is some. So they're in about 18 feet here. But yeah, that's a good pile of fish stacked up on that rock pile. So let's hop up on the front deck and I'll walk you through these slip bobber setups. Now let's talk about rigging slip bobber setups. I run these 8-footers. These are ACC Crappie Sticks 8-foot 2-piece rods. I like them because they got the big eyelets, specifically right as you get them outside the reel. They got these really big eyelets, help that slip stop slide right through it if you're doing a lot of casting. Great finesse style rod. You can also use it like a hybrid vertical jigging rod if you wanted. I typically run a 1,000 size reel. This is the PC Fun Viper X. I feel like this is kind of your most economical reel setup. I think they're around $35, something like that. 1,000 size for panfish. If I'm going to rig this slip bobber setup for maybe smallmouth or walleye, I'd probably go to a 2,000 size at a minimum. I'm running 6-pound copolymer. This is the ACC Crappie Sticks 6-pound copolymer line. Now occasionally I will upsize the line to 8 or even 10-pound tests, specifically when I go down south. They have some big crappie down south. So you do got to put on a little bit heavier line so it doesn't get broken off. So now let's get into the slip stops themselves. We got rubber bobber stops, yarn stops. Let's first talk about the pros and cons of each of these. So the rubber bobber stop is great, super simple to tie on. You put the line right through this metal loop, slide the bobber stop right on the line, not a big deal. These are great at holding their place. They do not slip. The only time I've actually seen them slip is typically when you're reeling in a fish. They will get caught in that first eyelet. Doesn't matter what kind of rod you got on. Typically the way around that is you give a little bit of slack and you reel through that slack, allowing that rubber bobber stop to kind of miss the first couple eyelets of your rod. And by the time it gets to the third eyelet, it's not going to get stuck. So sticks to your spot. You're not going to have to readjust it a bunch of times. Super simple to tie on. If you do catch a bunch of fish and it unfortunately gets caught in that first eyelet and it does slide and you got to readjust it a few times, the one con about this that I've noticed is it will twist the line quite a bit, and it's going to actually make it difficult for that line to slide through either the inline slip bobber or a hybrid slip bobber like I'm about to show you here. That is the one kind of bad thing about these bobber stops. The yarn stops, again, super simple to tie on. Just put the line through this little plastic tube, slide the knot onto the line, pull the tag ends of the yarn tight. Typically I clip about 3/4 of an inch, or I leave 3/4 of an inch of yarn because you're gonna have to retighten these. That is kind of one of the downsides. They do come loose, but retightening them is not that big a deal. They are very easy to adjust if you need to adjust them. These probably get stuck more, or they move more if you do catch a bunch of fish. But I've actually been using these quite a bit because they don't twist the line when you do have to adjust them. So it doesn't really affect the drop rate of that jig or even prevent the jig or whatever lure that you're using to get to the depth of those fish that you're trying to catch. So I've actually been using the yarn stops a lot more than I have the rubber bobber stops. In the past, I've been leaning towards the rubber bobber stops, but I'd rather not have to clip off 20 or 30 feet of line just because it's so twisted and potentially have to retie my entire rig because of using these rubber bobber stops. I'd rather just deal with kind of it's kind of a pain, but deal with the readjustment of a yarn stop, knowing I don't have to completely retie my rig if I do have to adjust the stop itself. Now again, one trick to avoid both of these from getting stuck and kind of moving your spot on the line. Typically it happens when you're reeling in a fish. It'll get caught in that first eyelet again. And you just got to give a little bit of slack, reel through that slack, and allow that stop to get to the second or third eyelet on your rod. And by the time it gets there, it's not going to get stuck on any rod tip. Again, I run the 8-foot ACC rods. They got the bigger eyelets, so both these stops move through these eyelets pretty well. I don't have too many issues with them. But I'm interested to hear which stop you like to use, or if you like to tie your own stops. I've done a video on that as well. Let me know in the comments which style you like to use for slip bobber setups. Speaking of bobbers, let's talk about the bobbers themselves. All right, next let's talk about slip bobbers themselves. So probably the most common is this through line slip bobber. The only time I run through line slip bobbers is if they got this metal grommet here. So either kind of this stick bobber setup, otherwise you got the wobble bobber setup, which is kind of basically just this piece of it. Then you got these hybrid slip bobber rigs. So I know it looks like a spring bobber setup, but if you notice, there are two notches. So this very top notch toward the top of that stem, that line actually slips through there. The notch itself doesn't close all the way on the spring, so it allows the line to slip through there like a slip bobber. This second notch, that lower notch, that is a fixed bobber setup. So as the spring shuts, it locks in that line on that second position. But this top notch here, it allows that line to slide through there pretty easily. Now if you notice on this hybrid style, it has the plastic grommet through the middle of it. So I don't actually run the line through these style of bobbers, and there's a reason for that. If you run a through line system where the top of the bobber is plastic, what'll happen as you catch fish, that line, no matter what you use, I got copolymer on right now, but if you're using mono, fluorocarbon, braided line, it'll cut into that plastic and it'll start fraying your line after so many hook sets. So if you're gonna run a through line system, make sure the the very top of the bobber, that grommet is actually metal or brass or some kind of hard surface other than plastic, so that it actually glides through your line and your line doesn't cut into it. So typically if I'm running some smaller jig setup, 16th ounce to maybe an 1/8 ounce, I'm running something like this out of the hybrid jig setup. If I'm going a little bit heavier, 3/16 to 3/8, well, maybe not 3/8, 3/16 to possibly all the way up to a 1/2 ounce jig if you're going for walleye or smallmouth, going with a through line setup with a metal grommet system. Typically I run plastics with either one of these bobbers, but again, with the hybrid setup, I'm using a little bit lighter jig head. So for this, I'm typically using either a 16th, or in this case, I got an 1/8 ounce jig head tied on here. And then as for plastics, I'm just running a minnow style plastic. This is a Crappie Monster small fry. This is more of a very finesse minnow style plastic, super sensitive tail. And when you're bobber fishing with plastics, you do gotta pop the bobber. You can't just let it sit there like live bait. So by popping the bobber, by kind of popping that bobber along, it moves that jig. If the crappie are pretty active, you don't really need to do much to trigger the bite. I typically run that Crappie Monster small fry pattern. There's not really much tail action to it, but it's a minnow plastic. It mimics bait fish that are already in the system, especially the pattern I got on now. It's a margarita pattern. That's basically either that monster milk or margarita pattern. Both of them mimic a lot of the bait fish we have in the river system here. But if the crappie get a little bit finicky, something with a super sensitive tail and a lot of action like that Euro Tackle B vibe is another great choice for the slip bobber and plastic setup. So when determining a bite with plastics, it's a little bit different than live bait. If you're using minnows, crawlers, leeches, typically the bite, they just slowly take the bobber down, or they'll start running side to side as they slowly inhale that live bait. When you're using a plastic, specifically if you're popping it along, if it's pretty calm out, you're not letting the waves do the work, or you don't have the wind to let the waves do the work, the crappie will do two style of bites. There'll be two types of signals. You'll either see a quick pop of the bobber and then they'll kind of let it go right away, or what typically happens, and what actually happened the past couple days I've been out here, as that bobber is just sitting in the water, what'll happen is that crappie will come up and grab the jig, and it'll start going up the water column with the bobber. What'll happen is that bobber will slowly start to go sideways. That's probably the most common bite you're gonna find with crappie, especially if they're really aggressive. They'll run up the water column at the bait. Oftentimes you have to watch that bobber stop. In this case, this red rubber bobber stop, I can pretty easily see. And obviously those pink yarn bobber stops you can see really well. What'll happen a lot of times is the rubber bobber stop, or whatever stop you're using, won't actually get to the bobber itself. It'll actually just stop moving, and that's because the crappie came up the water column so fast, grabbed the jig, and it just stopped the line from moving, so your bobber is just sitting sideways. It kind of looks like your jig's already on the bottom and you got your stop set too deep, but that just mostly because that fish came running up the water column, grabbed it, and your stop didn't get a chance to actually get to the bobber itself. If you're fishing where there's a lot of wind and waves, another common bite both for live bait and for plastics is the fish will grab the jig like this and it'll just hold it as that wave goes up, and it should raise the bobber up over the top of the wave. The bobber just kind of stays through the wave and it goes underneath the wave. That's how you know you got a bite. If you're fishing with plastics, it's probably going to be a quick pop. As soon as they feel pressure from that bobber trying to lift up with that wave, they'll probably let it go. So you'll see the bobber kind of go through the wave for a little bit and then it'll quick pop up over the top of it. That's how you know you got a bite. Oftentimes you kind of miss them. It's a little bit tricky fishing with plastics if you're fishing in a lot of wind and waves. Most commonly, I see the same style of bite even with calm water. Crappie will come up, hit the jig, that bobber will just go, basically that bobber itself will just kind of slowly turn, or it'll just quick flop on its side, and that's how you know you got a bite. Those are the keys to look for when you're slip bobber fishing for panfish, specifically crappie. Bluegill, pretty much just hammer it, then they'll pop it straight down, but crappie really like to come up underneath that jig, and that bobber's just gonna go sideways. So these are the setups that I use for slip bobber fishing. I'm gonna link everything in the video description below: rod, reel, line, bobbers that I use, different jig sizes that I use for each bobber. If you're interested in the rod or the line, check out accrappie.com. Also, they got that sale going on. Get a performance hoodie like this, pick up a performance hoodie and get a free ACC Crappie Sticks tumbler. If you got any comments or questions about slip bobber setups that I talked about, or how to use side imaging to find some of these fish, or just places you can find some of these fish on a river system, post them in the comment section below. Also, if you have any ideas for future videos that you want to go into in-depth coverage on, be sure to post them in the comments as well. Be sure to use a slip bobber setup to catch a ton of fish for the rest of the summer. It's a great setup to use. Brush piles, rock piles, around docks. It'll catch a ton of fish in this late summer pattern. See you in the next one.